As was the case with China, to try to do a quick summary of the ancient history of India is really kind of a foolhardy enterprise. There's just so much richness to this, particularly in the development of philosophical and religious thought, as well as the kind of social aspects to it. Suffice it to say that the Indian subcontinent is one of the richest contributors to world history. Several major world religions, most significantly Hinduism and Buddhism, emerged from the subcontinent, and then a bunch of kind of offshoots of those, Jainism and later Sikhism, right, both emerge in the Indian subcontinent. This is a place that's endlessly fascinating to me. I just recently returned from a study abroad with students there, and completely fell in love with India again. It's not the first time I'd been there, but I just highly recommend, if you want to study a fascinating place. I've said this about a number of places, but India is truly worth your time to delve into. Indian civilization is one of the very earliest. It's contemporary with the civilizations of Egypt and the Fertile Crescent. At least from the middle of the fourth millennium BCE, we have a highly developed civilization along the Indus River. Right, so this is the Indus Valley civilization. This map over here in the upper right shows kind of the extent of it. The two most significant archaeological sites that have been discovered are Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, in both of which are in modern-day Pakistan. But this extended, the civilization extended throughout the Indus Valley, and then they're kind of related Stone Age or early Bronze Age cultures that are in surrounding areas. This is an important contact zone between the peoples of the subcontinent and then the peoples of what we call the Middle East and Central Asia, right? And so there's a lot of cross fertilization going on all through ancient history and in more recent times as well. But this Indus Valley civilization was highly developed. Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa both had populations in the tens of thousands. Mohenjo-Daro may have had over 100,000 people at one point. There was a high degree of standardization. Streets were only of two widths, and things like the stones or the bricks used to make buildings were all of a standard size. And you can tell that there's just a lot of sort of centralization of authority and a high degree of organization and things like that, right? So this civilization persisted for, obviously there were transformations, and the archaeological record in the small written record that we have doesn't give us enough, I think, to allow us a thick description of it, but it persisted for over 1,500 years in some form. Obviously, with a lot of transformation going on during that period. Sometime in the middle of the second millennium BCE, there's an important sequence that leads to transformation. There were two major hypotheses for why this happened for a very long time. This was largely a European idea, operating under the assumption that anyone who was Indo-European, who was kind of related to Caucasian European peoples, were superior, right? And so the idea was that an Indo-European speaking people called the Aryans, note the word there, which is later used as a kind of racial category, of course, by the Nazis, that they invaded from Central Asia or the Middle East, and subjected the native Dravidian peoples, that's the term for the indigenous Indians, to their rule, and established themselves as the elite ruling majority, right? And then they brought in things like literacy, the Sanskrit language and its accompanying written form were the earliest pieces of that date to around 1500 BCE, and it was thought that the Aryans brought that in because Sanskrit is an Indo-European language. This was challenged in part as a kind of post-colonial exercise, right? And the internal transformation hypothesis was put forward. I don't know, this was maybe 3 decades ago or so, which suggested that actually this was more of a process of internal transformation. There may have been some immigrants from outside. There is no archaeological evidence to support the Aryan migration hypothesis. There doesn't seem to be the introduction of a new type of architecture or anything like that, or material remains that are significantly different, right? So that's one of the things that kind of lends weight to this internal transformation hypothesis. But both of these have their shortcomings. I mean, the linguistic evidence demonstrates that Indo-European speakers were present, and seem to have entered at some point, and brought this written language, or developed this written language. Okay, so the jury's still out on all of this. There's probably some element of both of these that's valid. But from that point on, we have a lot of, I mean, not a lot, but we have some pretty solid written evidence about the culture, less about the society. Most of the texts from ancient India are religious or philosophical in nature, which is one of the maybe biases that we run into in the record, right? That we don't know enough about the day-to-day lives of people in ancient India, because almost all of the written record is devoted to, stories about the gods and information about rituals that need to be conducted, and things like that. There is some, what we would call scientific and mathematical literature, some kind of learned things that appear fairly early on as well. It's obvious that the Indian subcontinent is rich in culture in the ancient world, and there's a lot going on intellectually, but the written record doesn't always reveal everything that was going on. One of the things that emerges after the breakup of the Indus Valley civilization and the spreading of the remnants of its culture through the Indian subcontinent, and even into areas beyond that, down into Sri Lanka and places, other kind of neighboring places, is the development of this thing called the caste system. Now, I imagine that many of you have been exposed to this. I don't want to belabor the point, and there's a good description in our textbook about it, but suffice it to say that society became increasingly rigid, that people who worked certain jobs, and held certain positions in society, that this was deemed hereditary. The basic idea is that there are 4 main varnas, and there's a story to back this up, which, it's talking about people, the various peoples of the world emerging from the body of a god. That the Brahmin caste, or varna, varna is the Hindi word for this, or the Sanskrit word for it. The Brahmin varna, right? These emerged from the head or the mouth, and they were the intellectuals. They were the religious authorities. They were the ones who spoke and preached. And then from the shoulders and arms came the Kshatriya, who are the warriors, and also the governing class to a large extent. From the belly emerged the merchants, which are called the Vaishya. And then from the legs and feet come the Shudra, who are the workers, right? The farmers and others. And this creates the whole body, but each of these are distinct from one another. And privilege went along with being a Brahmin or a Kshatriya for the most part. And that became more rigid, I think, in India, this kind of social organization, than anywhere else on earth. I mean, there are similar things we find in other civilizations, but people, for many centuries would not marry outside of their caste. It became an endogamous system. They would, someone who was born into a particular caste really only had the option to grow up and work that job, that trying to break out of it was almost impossible, because it was so rigid. Even today, you can tell with Indian surnames is something that I've spent a little time studying and talking to friends in India about, right? Some of the most common surnames relate to the caste system, or the kind of heritage of the caste system. The surname Singh, Singh, for instance, means warrior. And that's, from people who were descended from Kshatriya. And then the surname Patil, Patil, comes from or Patel in some cases, Patel is how it's transliterated. That comes from the merchants, so from the Vaisha. So anyway, there's a lot to say about the caste system. This is just one of the true pillars, I think, of ancient and even more recent Indian civilization. Lots of religious developments that we could talk about. And again, the textbook contains a good amount of information on this. The earliest religious texts come from the middle of the second millennium BCE to the end of the second millennium BC, so about 1500 to about 1000. These are composed. They're called the Vedas. There are 4 main Vedas. These contain stories about the gods and about rituals that need to be performed for the gods. And this whole pantheon of deities with the key deities of Vishnu and Shiva and Brahma were kind of formed during this period, and their stories are contained, or at least some stories about them are contained in the Vedas. This is a highly ritualistic world. It talks about one's duty being, to worship gods properly and to perform the proper rituals. There's not a lot of information here about ethics. We've talked about this already in some other civilizations, right? That ethics aren't tied anciently in many cases to the will of gods, right, or to pleasing gods or anything like that. However, the Vedas seem to have left people wanting. By about the middle of the first millennium BCE, around 600 or so, we see the emergence of developments within Hinduism, or what comes to be called Hinduism, kind of the native indigenous religion, right, which goes back to the Vedas, but there's a new set of texts called the Upanishads that are written in this period. And these have a lot more about intent and about ethics, right? It's in the Upanishads that and the religious developments of that period, that the whole concept of samsara, which is the cycle of birth and rebirth and reincarnation and all of that, as well as the key concepts of dharma, which is duty, and then karma, which is action, that if you follow your dharma or you try to meet your dharma, you collect karma, hopefully good karma, which allows you to be reborn to a higher position. But then also this notion that everybody contains at their core something called the Atman, which is a kind of divine spark connected to the whole of the cosmos, and that the ultimate goal is to achieve what's called moksha, which is to be released from this. But the Upanishads acknowledge that a focus on fulfilling one's dharma, one's duty, and collecting good karma would kind of tie one to an existence and tie one to rebirth, right? So the Upanishads introduce this whole notion of asceticism, that people ought to reject the world and kind of go through these stages of life where they try to achieve moksha by shedding their karma and being released from this whole cycle. These are called the ashrama or the ashrams, which are kind of these this life path that the Upanishads suggest to follow. Around the same time, we have the emergence, of course, of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, who rejects that altogether, right? Siddhartha was a prince, a very privileged man, who spent his early life, kind of wanting for nothing. But on a journey, he encountered a sick man, an old man, and a dead man, or a corpse. And this led him to a kind of existential crisis where he wondered, is this what I'm headed for? Right? He had to acknowledge that that's what he was headed for. And so, this led him to seek enlightenment in various ways. He spent some time as an ascetic, kind of doing what the Upanishads said he should do. But he found that he was no closer to enlightenment for all of that. And so, it was after a lot of meditation. There's a place called Bodh Gaya in India where, he's legendarily, he achieved enlightenment after meditating under this thing called the Bodhi tree. And the teachings of Buddha suggest that, or hold, I should say, that all life is suffering, and that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is bad, but we're not quite satisfied. There's a lot of angst that we have with the kind of vicissitudes of life, right? Suffering is caused by ignorance. But one, by following what he called the Eightfold Path, which is really just sort of the right way to conceive of things and the right way to live. One can achieve what he called nirvana, right, which is different from moksha. He rejected the whole notion of karma and the idea that everyone had the Atman, the divine spark in them. He said, we want to destroy everything about ourselves individually and enter the void, right? There was no kind of cosmic whole to this. This didn't lend itself well, I think, to later developments, and Buddhism goes in very different directions when we get to things like Mahayana Buddhism or Pure Land Buddhism or something like that, which is really kind of outside of the scope of our inquiry in this class. But Buddhism is, a rejection of some of the things the Upanishads said. And in response to that, maybe the challenge of Buddhism, Hinduism, produces later texts toward the end of the first millennium BCE, the most significant of which is this incredibly long poem called the Mahabharata, the most famous part of which is the Bhagavad Gita, which, takes on these notions or the challenge of Buddhism by trying to talk about the relationship between duty and devotion and all of that. And so we will read the Bhagavad Gita later in this term and try to make sense of that. But this is the important context for that. One last kind of focus here. We want to talk about very briefly about a couple of empires. India resisted, probably because the area is so diverse and quite large geographically, right, with a lot of diversity in topography. Some parts of India are desert, some parts are lush, tropical, kind of rainforest places. Some are, there are steppes. Of course, the Himalaya mountains, which run to the north of, or kind of border the north of the Indian subcontinent, were created by India crashing into the rest of Asia, through the movements of plate tectonics. But in any case, there are a couple of exceptions to this. The Mauryan Empire, you can see the dates on the map here. The most significant, and this unifies most of the Indian subcontinent, including parts of the Middle East here, right? But including the Indus River and then the Ganges or the Ganga River, as they call it, right? All the way up nearly to the Himalayas here. And so that, is a successful empire. The most significant ruler of the Mauryan Empire was King Ashoka, who ruled in the middle of the 3rd century BCE. And Ashoka started out as a kind of brutal military leader who, conquered in great bloodbaths, right, cataclysms. But then he, saw the problems with that and kind of repented of that violence and, achieved enlightenment. Ashoka was a follower of the teachings of Buddha and sort of patterned the laws and things of his kingdom after the teachings of Buddha. Ashoka is extremely famous. There are symbols of Ashoka, like the Ashoka pillars, as they're called, which show 3 lions, as well as the Dharma wheel, 24 spokes of the Dharma wheel, which represents duty, as I said, and then the lotus flower, right? These are all Buddhist images. So Ashoka was a kind of enlightened ruler, as he's called, or at least he has the reputation. This is the Dharma wheel. The Ashoka wheel is now on the Indian national flag, right? So he's become a kind of symbol. And then the Mauryan Empire broke up, and for about 5 more centuries, there was disunity, right, until the establishment of what's called the Gupta Empire around 320 CE, which lasted for a little over 200 years. This is the high point of what's called classical Indian civilization. The art, the literature, the philosophical works and things were highly developed during this period. But that is somewhat later than most of the other stuff we're covering in this course. Okay, so hopefully that's a decent overview of Indian history and gives us at least some sense of the context for a text like the Bhagavad Gita, which we'll read. Thanks.